Welcome back to Unheard Stories, the channel where we unravel some of the most jaw-dropping tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge. If you're a fan of stories that keep you glued to the edge of your seat, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more stories that will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel and connect people from all walks of life. Now picture this. You've built what seems like the perfect life. You have a beautiful home, a loving partner, and the anticipation of a newborn baby on the way, a dream that's about to come true. You're ready to embrace fatherhood, to cradle the little bundle of joy you've spent months preparing for. But then, in one life-altering moment, everything comes crashing down. Today we're diving into one man's shocking story, a story of betrayal so deep it shakes the very foundation of his life. Imagine arriving at the hospital to meet your newborn baby, only to be stopped at the door by your mother-in-law, who seems desperate to keep you out. Confused but determined, you push past her, only to discover a truth that leaves you reeling. The baby in your wife's arms isn't yours. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of calculated deceit, explosive confrontations, and ultimately, a path to redemption. What would you do if you found out the person you trusted most had betrayed you in the worst possible way? Would you walk away or would you fight back? Stay tuned as we unravel the twists and turns of this unforgettable story. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the storm of lies, heartbreak, and revenge that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. To truly understand the magnitude of this story, let's first meet the key players. Michael was a man of integrity, stability, and routine. At 35, he had built a solid career as an IT consultant, providing him with a comfortable life and a reputation as the guy everyone could rely on. He was the kind of person who always had a plan, whether it was for his professional goals, his weekend DIY projects, or his future as a father. Michael's structured world was matched by his unwavering devotion to his wife, Julia. For 8 years, their marriage had been a cornerstone of his happiness. He adored Julia for her lively personality, her quick wit, and the way she could light up a room with her presence. But while Michael was grounded and dependable, Julia was a free spirit. At 32, she thrived on spontaneity and attention. A former event planner, she had a knack for charming people, always managing to be the center of attention wherever she went. Michael loved her energy, even if it sometimes clashed with his more reserved nature. Julia's relationship with Michael's family, however, was complex. While Michael's parents adored her, there was one person who had always seemed too close for comfort: Michael's younger brother, Ethan. Ethan, at 30, was everything Julia admired: confident, charming, and adventurous. Unlike Michael's steady and methodical approach to life, Ethan was unpredictable and magnetic, with a rebellious streak that made him the black sheep of the family. He was the type who would quit a job on a whim, travel across the country for a weekend, or show up unannounced with wild stories that captivated everyone in the room. From the outside, Michael had no reason to suspect anything unusual about Julia and Ethan's relationship. After all, they were family. But there had always been subtle signs, things Michael chalked up to Julia's extroverted personality or Ethan's easygoing nature. There were the lingering glances during family dinners, the inside jokes they shared that Michael wasn't a part of, and the occasional moments when Julia would defend Ethan in arguments, even when he was clearly in the wrong. Michael ignored these moments, trusting Julia completely. He believed that their marriage, built on years of love and shared experiences, was unshakable. Besides, Julia had always been clear about her devotion to him, often saying, "You're the only man I could ever rely on." Ethan, on the other hand, had always seemed to live in Michael's shadow. Despite his charm, he couldn't match Michael's success or stability. Growing up, Ethan often joked about how Michael had set the bar too high, making it impossible for him to meet the family's expectations. When Julia announced her pregnancy, Michael was overjoyed. For him, the idea of becoming a father was the culmination of everything he had worked for: a happy home, a loving marriage, and a legacy to pass on. He threw himself into the preparations, from painting the nursery a soft green to reading every parenting book he could get his hands on. Julia seemed equally excited, often sharing her plans for baby showers and family outings. But as the pregnancy progressed, Michael couldn't help but notice subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more secretive, often brushing off his questions about her frequent outings or the sudden influx of late-night text messages. "Just catching up with friends," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You know how it is, I want to soak up this time before the baby arrives." Michael wanted to believe her. After all, he had no reason not to. Julia had always been the social butterfly, and he didn't want to be the overbearing husband who questioned her every move. But deep down, a seed of doubt began to grow. Michael's relationship with Ethan had always been cordial, even if they weren't particularly close. But during Julia's pregnancy, Ethan started showing up more frequently. "Just checking in on you guys," Ethan would say, flashing his signature grin. He'd bring over takeout, crack jokes to lighten the mood, and even offer to help Michael with his home projects, a gesture that was out of character for him. Michael appreciated the effort but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan and Julia had always gotten along well, but now their interactions seemed different. There was an easiness between them, a level of familiarity that Michael couldn't quite place. Julia, for her part, dismissed Michael's concerns whenever he brought them up. "Ethan's just being supportive," she said. "You should be happy he's taking an interest in the baby. He's going to be an uncle after all." Michael nodded, trying to push aside his unease. He wanted to believe that everything was fine, that his doubts were just the result of stress and exhaustion. But the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Looking back, there were other signs Michael had missed, moments that seemed innocuous at the time but would later take on a deeper significance. There was the day Julia insisted Ethan accompany her to a doctor's appointment because Michael was stuck at work. "It's just a routine checkup," she said. "No need to take time off." Then there was the time Michael overheard Julia laughing on the phone late at night. When he asked who she was talking to, she smiled and said, "Just Ethan. He's being ridiculous as usual." Michael brushed off these moments, not wanting to seem paranoid. He trusted Julia, and he didn't want to believe that she could betray him. But trust, as Michael was about to learn, is fragile. And the betrayal that was about to unfold would shatter his world in ways he could never have imagined. The day Julia went into labor was supposed to be the happiest moment of Michael's life. He had imagined this day countless times, rushing to the hospital, holding Julia's hand, and hearing his baby's first cry. It was the culmination of months of preparation, love, and hope. Michael was at work when he got the call. Julia's voice trembled with urgency. "It's happening, Michael. I'm at St. Andrew's. Room 317. Hurry." He bolted out of the office, leaving behind unfinished reports and well-wishing colleagues. His mind raced with excitement and nerves as he drove to the hospital. Everything he had been waiting for was finally here. But as he arrived at St. Andrew's and made his way to room 317, the excitement was quickly replaced by confusion. Standing outside the room, blocking the door, was Julia's mother, Margaret. She looked nervous, almost frantic, as she placed a hand on his chest. "Michael," Margaret began, her voice shaky. "Maybe you should wait out here for a bit?" Michael frowned. "What are you talking about? My wife is in there. She just gave birth to my child." Margaret hesitated, glancing at the door before meeting his eyes. "It's complicated. Just give her some time, okay?" Michael felt a jolt of unease. Something wasn't right. "What's going on, Margaret? Why are you acting like this?" Before she could answer, Michael brushed past her, determined to see Julia and their baby. Margaret called after him, but her voice faded as he pushed open the door. The room was quiet, save for the soft coos of a newborn baby. Julia was sitting up in the hospital bed, cradling the tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up as Michael entered, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. "Michael," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and dread. "You're here." Michael's gaze moved to the baby, his heart swelling with emotion, until it stopped. The baby in Julia's arms had soft, caramel-colored skin and a full head of dark curls. A beautiful baby, but not a baby that looked anything like him or Julia. They were both white. This child was not. Time seemed to freeze. Michael stood there, his mind reeling as he struggled to process what he was seeing. The truth hit him like a freight train. "Julia," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and fury. "What is this? What's going on?" Julia clutched the baby tighter, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Michael, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Michael snapped, his voice rising. "Explain how the baby you just gave birth to isn't mine? Explain how you've been lying to me this entire time?" Margaret entered the room then, her face ashen. "Michael, calm down," she pleaded. "This isn't good for anyone." Michael turned to her, his anger boiling over. "Did you know about this? Were you in on this lie?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. Julia broke down, her sobs filling the room. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she cried. "It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Michael said, his voice cold and sharp. "You don't accidentally have a baby with someone else, Julia. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Julia's words tumbled out in a frantic rush. It was Ethan, okay? It happened months ago. It didn't mean anything. I love you, Michael. I was scared to tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Michael's blood ran cold. Ethan? He repeated, barely able to speak the name. You slept with my brother? Julia nodded, her sobs intensifying. It was a one-time thing. I swear. I didn't think it would lead to this. Michael felt the floor shift beneath him. His brother. The man he had trusted, the man who had been a part of his life since childhood. The betrayal wasn't just Julia's, it was Ethan's too. They had both destroyed him. And you were just going to let me believe this child was mine? Michael demanded. You were going to let me raise a baby that isn't mine? Julia's sobs turned to desperate pleas. I thought once the baby was born we could move past this. I thought you'd love the baby anyway. Michael let out a bitter laugh, his anger consuming him. You thought I wouldn't notice? You thought I'd just accept this lie and go on with my life like nothing happened? The baby began to cry, its tiny wails cutting through the tension in the room. Julia rocked the baby gently, trying to soothe it, but Michael couldn't bring himself to feel anything but anger and betrayal. As Michael stood there, his world crumbling around him, the door to the room opened again. Ethan walked in, his usual cocky grin quickly fading when he saw Michael's face. Michael, Ethan began, raising his hands defensively. I can explain. Michael's fury exploded. You can explain? You slept with my wife. You're the father of her baby. What could you possibly explain? Ethan stammered, his confidence evaporating. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean to hurt you. Michael took a step toward him, his fists clenched. You didn't mean to hurt me? You didn't mean to destroy my marriage? My life? You disgust me. Margaret stepped between them, her hands outstretched. Enough. This isn't helping anyone. We need to stay calm. Michael turned to Julia, his voice cold and final. I want a DNA test. And I refuse to sign the birth certificate. This is your mess, Julia. You and Ethan can deal with it. Julia's face crumpled, her pleas falling on deaf ears. Michael, please. Don't do this. I need you. The baby needs you. But Michael was already walking out the door. He didn't look back. As Michael drove home, his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions: rage, heartbreak, humiliation. How had he missed the signs? How had he allowed himself to be blindsided by the two people he trusted most? The house he returned to felt cold and empty. The nursery he had spent months preparing now felt like a cruel joke. Michael sat in the silence, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him. But amidst the despair, one thought burned brightly. He wouldn't let them win. He wouldn't let Julia and Ethan destroy him. This was just the beginning. Michael sat alone in the quiet of his home, the betrayal replaying in his mind like a never-ending loop. The laughter, the inside jokes, the moments he had brushed off as harmless now felt like knives twisting in his chest. Julia's affair with Ethan wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated destruction of everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in. But if they thought they could break him, they were wrong. Michael wasn't going to sit idly by and let them get away with it. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his future. The first thing Michael did was call his lawyer, Jessica. She was sharp, ruthless, and exactly the person he needed on his side. Jessica, Michael began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, I need to file for divorce. And I need to make sure Julia pays for what she's done. Jessica didn't waste time. We'll need proof. Do you have anything? Texts, emails, anything that confirms the affair? Michael had plenty. He had taken screenshots of Julia's messages confessing her infidelity and naming Ethan as the father. He had also recorded their hospital confrontation, capturing Julia's desperate pleas and Ethan's feeble attempts at justification. It wasn't just proof, it was ammunition. Jessica's plan was clear. File for divorce on the grounds of adultery, demand a paternity test, and refuse all financial support for Julia and the baby. She made her choices, Jessica said firmly. Now she'll have to live with the consequences. Michael wasn't done with Ethan. His brother had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and Michael wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He called Ethan and demanded they meet in person. The meeting took place at a quiet bar on the edge of town, a place where no one would overhear their conversation. Ethan showed up looking uneasy, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with nervous fidgeting. Michael, I'm glad you called, he began. I wanted to explain. Save it, Michael interrupted, his tone icy. I don't want your excuses. I want answers. Ethan looked down at his drink, unable to meet Michael's eyes. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Michael laughed bitterly. Didn't mean for it to go this far? You slept with my wife. You got her pregnant. And you thought I wouldn't find out? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know what to do. Julia told me she didn't want to hurt you. Michael's anger flared. Hurt me? The two of you destroyed my life. And now you're going to pay for it? Ethan's face paled. What do you mean? You'll see, Michael said, standing up. Enjoy the calm while it lasts because your life is about to get a lot more complicated. Michael wasn't interested in keeping Julia and Ethan's affair a secret. They had humiliated him, and now it was their turn to face the consequences. He started by gathering their closest friends and family for a family meeting. When everyone was seated, Michael stood at the front of the room, his voice steady and calm. I've called you all here because there's something you need to know. Julia and Ethan have been having an affair. And the child Julia just gave birth to? It's Ethan's, not mine. The room erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Julia, who had been sitting quietly, burst into tears. Ethan sat frozen, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Michael continued, For months they lied to me. They deceived all of us. But I won't let them hide behind their lies anymore. The fallout was immediate. Julia's parents were devastated, unable to believe their daughter could betray her husband in such a way. Ethan's relationship with his family crumbled as everyone turned their backs on him. The once charming black sheep of the family was now a pariah. The legal battle that followed was brutal. The paternity test confirmed what everyone already knew: the baby was Ethan's. Jessica used this evidence to ensure Michael wouldn't be financially responsible for the child. Julia, desperate and humiliated, tried to negotiate. Michael, please, she begged during a mediation session. Don't cut us off completely. The baby needs support. Michael's response was cold and final. The baby isn't mine. And you lost the right to ask me for anything when you betrayed me. The court sided with Michael, granting him a divorce and absolving him of any financial obligations. Julia was left to fend for herself, her once comfortable life now in ruins. Ethan wasn't spared either. Michael knew that his brother's affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a reflection of his lack of integrity. Using the evidence he had gathered, Michael contacted Ethan's employer and shared the truth about his actions. Ethan, who worked in a client-facing role, was promptly fired. His company couldn't risk having someone so publicly disgraced representing them. Without a job and with his reputation in tatters, Ethan's life began to spiral. For Michael, revenge wasn't just about punishing Julia and Ethan, it was about taking back control. He sold the house he and Julia had shared, moving into a sleek apartment in the city. He redecorated his life, removing every trace of the betrayal and filling his space with things that brought him joy. He also started focusing on himself. He joined a gym, took up photography, and began attending therapy to process the emotional toll of the betrayal. Through it all, he learned to value himself in a way he never had before. One day, as he looked around his new home, Michael realized something profound. He had survived. Julia and Ethan's betrayal had broken his heart, but it hadn't broken him. He was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever. Michael's revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice. Julia and Ethan had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. Meanwhile, Michael was moving forward, building a life that was truly his own. He had learned that betrayal, as painful as it is, can also be a catalyst for growth. It forces you to confront your own worth, to set boundaries, and to demand more from the people in your life. And in the end, Michael didn't just find revenge, he found freedom. The storm of betrayal and revenge had passed, but Michael's life was far from settled. He stood in the ruins of what once was his marriage, his trust, and his vision of the future, and realized it was time to rebuild. The legal battle had been won, the truth was out, and Julia and Ethan were left to deal with the fallout of their actions. Now it was Michael's turn to heal. Sitting in his new apartment, Michael often found himself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The betrayal had shaken him to his core, but it had also forced him to take a hard look at his life. He thought about all the red flags he had ignored, the moments of doubt he had brushed aside, and the blind trust he had placed in Julia and Ethan. In therapy, Michael's counselor helped him unpack these feelings. Betrayal doesn't just hurt because of what someone else did, she explained. It hurts because it makes us question ourselves, our judgment, our worth, our ability to trust again. Michael nodded, her words resonating deeply. He had spent months blaming himself for not seeing the signs sooner, but therapy taught him to shift the blame where it belonged, onto Julia and Ethan. They had made their choices, and those choices had nothing to do with his worth as a person. Meanwhile, the lives of Julia and Ethan had taken a nosedive. Julia, once the center of attention in their social circle, found herself ostracized. Her friends, disgusted by her actions, distanced themselves. She struggled financially, having lost the support Michael had once provided, and the reality of single motherhood hit her hard that Ethan's life wasn't any better. Without a job and with his reputation in tatters, he moved back into their parents' house, a shadow of the confident, charming man he had once been. The family, still reeling from the betrayal, barely spoke to him. For the first time in his life, Ethan faced the consequences of his recklessness. Michael heard bits and pieces of their struggles through mutual acquaintances, but he didn't let it affect him. Their downfall wasn't his responsibility, nor was it his concern. He had his own life to focus on. Michael threw himself into rediscovering who he was outside of his marriage. He started with small changes, decorating his apartment with vibrant, modern pieces that reflected his evolving identity. The sterile nursery he had once painted for a child that wasn't his was replaced by an art studio where he began experimenting with painting. The act of creating something new felt therapeutic, a reminder that beauty could emerge from pain. He also began taking better care of his physical health. Joining a gym was initially a way to burn off the anger he still carried, but it quickly became a passion. Michael felt stronger both physically and emotionally with each passing day. He rekindled friendships he had let slip during his marriage. Friday nights became a time to catch up with old friends over dinner or drinks, laughing and sharing stories that had nothing to do with the past. These connections reminded Michael that he wasn't alone and that his life still held joy and meaning. One of the most transformative moments for Michael came when he decided to travel. He had always dreamed of seeing the world, but his responsibilities at home had kept him grounded. Now, with no ties holding him back, he booked a solo trip to Italy. Walking through the cobblestone streets of Rome, standing in awe before the Colosseum, and watching the sunset over the Amalfi Coast, Michael felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. Traveling alone forced him to rely on himself, to embrace spontaneity, and to find peace in his own company. The trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a turning point. It reminded Michael that the world was vast, beautiful, and full of possibilities. His life didn't have to revolve around the betrayal he had suffered. He could create new memories, new experiences, and a new future. It was during one of his photography outings that Michael met someone who would change his life in unexpected ways. Her name was Rachel, a freelance writer with a passion for travel and storytelling. They crossed paths at a local art fair where Michael was showcasing some of his photographs. Rachel was drawn to one of his pieces, a hauntingly beautiful shot of a stormy coastline. "This is incredible," she said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "It's like the storm is alive." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "That's exactly what I was going for. Life storms have a way of showing us what we're really made of." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long, they were exchanging stories about their lives. Rachel's openness and authenticity were a stark contrast to the deceit Michael had endured. She didn't try to impress him with grand gestures or charm. She was simply herself, and that was enough. Over time, their friendship blossomed into something deeper. Rachel didn't try to fix Michael or erase his past. Instead, she supported him as he navigated his healing journey. With her, Michael learned that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. It could be honest, supportive, and uplifting. One day, Michael received an unexpected message from Julia. It was short and simple. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you found happiness." Michael stared at the screen for a long moment. He didn't feel anger or pain, just a quiet sense of closure. He didn't respond. Julia's apology, while appreciated, wasn't necessary for his healing. He had already found peace within himself. Ethan never reached out, and Michael was glad for it. His brother's silence was all the closure he needed. As time passed, Michael realized that the betrayal, as painful as it had been, had given him something invaluable, the chance to rebuild a life that was truly his own. He no longer defined himself by his marriage or his role as a husband. He was Michael, a man who had faced heartbreak and come out stronger. Michael's days were filled with things that brought him joy. He spent weekends hiking with friends, capturing breathtaking photos of the landscapes that surrounded him. He explored new hobbies like cooking and pottery, finding fulfillment in the act of creating something from scratch. And with Rachel by his side, he discovered that love could be a source of strength rather than pain. Together they traveled the world, shared their dreams, and built a life filled with laughter, trust, and adventure. Michael's story is one of betrayal, yes, but it's also one of resilience. He learned that while you can't control the actions of others, you can control how you respond. Betrayal doesn't have to define you, it can shape you into someone stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. As Michael stood on a mountaintop during one of his hikes, watching the sunrise paint the sky with vibrant hues, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the betrayal but for the growth it had sparked. His life wasn't what he had once imagined, but it was beautiful in its own way. And that, he realized, was enough. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Michael, a man who turned heartbreak into strength and built a life filled with resilience and hope. His journey reminds us all that even the deepest betrayals can be a stepping stone to a brighter, better future. So, what would you have done in Michael's shoes? Could you have moved on, or would you have handled things differently? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Unheard Stories. We share tales of betrayal, revenge, and redemption that will leave you speechless. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another jaw-dropping episode. And before you go, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel and connect people from all over the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, even in the darkest moments there's always a way forward. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story. Take care.